Governance refers to all of processes of governing, whether undertaken by a government, market or network, whether over a family, tribe, formal or informal organization or territory, and whether through the laws, norms, power or language. Quote, "It relates to the processes of interaction and decision-making among the actors involved in a collective problem that lead to the creation, reinforcement, or reproduction of social norms and institutions. A variety of entities can govern. The most formal is a government, a body whose sole responsibility and authority is to make binding decisions in a given geopolitical system by establishing laws. Other types of governing bodies are possible. These include an organization, a socio-political group, or another informal group of people. Whatever form the entity takes, its governance is the way the rules, norms and actions are produced, sustained, regulated and held accountable. The degree of formality depends on the internal rules of a given organization. As such, governance may take many forms, driven by many different motivations and with many different results. For instance, a government may operate as a democracy where citizens vote on who should govern and the public good is the goal, while a non-profit organization may be governed by a small board of directors and pursue more specific aims. In addition, a variety of external actors without decision-making power can influence the process of governing. These include lobbies, political parties, and the media. Origin of the word. Like government, the word governance derives ultimately from the Greek verb kappa epsilon beta epsilon rho nu alpha omega. In above described sense, however, the term governance was reminted as recently as the 1990s by economists and political scientists, and disseminated by institutions such as the UN, IMF and World Bank. Its use in English can be traced to Charles Plummer's The Governance of England. This usage of governance to refer to the arrangements of governing became orthodox, including in Sidney Lowe's seminal text of the same title in 1904, and among some later British constitutional historians. Different uses. Governance is a very general concept that can refer to all manner of entities, equally. This generality means that governance is often defined more narrowly to refer to a particular level of governance associated with a type of organization, a particular field of governance associated with a type of activity or outcome, or a particular model of governance, often derived as an empirical and normative theory. Governance can be used not only to describe these diverse topics but also to define normative or practical agendas for them. Normative concepts of fair governance or good governance are common among political, public sector, voluntary, and private sector organizations. Governance as process in its most abstract sense. Governance is a theoretical concept referring to the actions and processes by which stable practices and organizations arise and persist. These actions and processes may operate in formal and informal organizations of any size, and they may function for any purpose, good or evil, for profit or not. Conceiving of governance in this way, one can apply the concept to states, to corporations, to non-profits, to NGOs, to partnerships and other associations, to project teams, and to any number of humans engaged in some purposeful activity. Most theories of governance as process arose out of neoclassical economics. These theories build deductive models based on the assumptions of modern economics, to show how rational actors may come to establish and sustain formal organizations, including firms and states, and informal organizations, such as networks and practices for governing the commons. Many of these theories draw on transaction cost economics. Public governance. It is useful to note the distinction between the concepts of governance and politics. Politics involves processes by which a group of people reach collective decisions generally regarded as binding on the group, and enforced as common policy. Governance, on the other hand, conveys the administrative and process-oriented elements of governing rather than its antagonistic ones. Such an argument continues to assume the possibility of the traditional separation between politics and administration. Contemporary governance practice and theory sometimes questions this distinction, premising that both governance and politics involve aspects of power and accountability. In general terms, public governance occurs in three broad ways: through networks involving public-private partnerships or with the collaboration of community organizations, through the use of market mechanisms whereby market principles of competition serve to allocate resources while operating under government regulation, through top-down methods that primarily involve governments and the state bureaucracy. Private governance. Private governance occurs when non-governmental entities, including private organizations, dispute resolution organizations, or other third-party groups, make rules and/or standards which have a binding effect on the quality of life and opportunities of the larger public. Simply put, private, not public, entities are making public policy. For example, insurance companies exert a great societal impact, largely invisible and freely accepted. That is a private form of governance in society. In turn, reinsurers, as private companies, may exert similar private governance over their underlying carriers. The term public policy should not be exclusively associated with policy that is made by government. Public policy may be created by either the private sector or the public sector. If one wishes to refer only to public policy that is made by government, the best term to use is governmental policy, which eliminates the ambiguity regarding the agent of the policy making. Global governance. Global governance is defined as the complex of formal and informal institutions, mechanisms, relationships, and processes between and among states, markets, citizens and organizations, both into and non-governmental, through which collective interests on the global plane are articulated, rights and obligations are established, and differences are mediated. In contrast to the traditional meaning of governance, some authors like James Rosenau have used the term global governance to denote the regulation of interdependent relations in the absence of an overarching political authority. The best example of this is the international system of relationships between independent states. The term, however, can apply wherever a group of free equals needs to form a regular relationship. The governance analytical framework. The governance analytical framework is a practical methodology for investigating governance processes, where various stakeholders interact and make decisions regarding collective issues, thus creating or reinforcing social norms and institutions. It is postulated that governance processes can be found in any society, and unlike other approaches, that these can be observed and analyzed from a non-normative perspective. It proposes a methodology based on 5 main analytical units: problems, actors, norms, processes, and nodal points. These logically articulated analytical units make up a coherent methodology aimed at being used as a tool for empirical social policy research. Non-profit governance. Non-profit governance has a dual focus: achieving the organization's social mission and the ensuring ensuring the organization is viable. Both responsibilities relate to fiduciary responsibility that a board of trustees has with respect to the exercise of authority over the explicit actions the organization takes. Public trust and accountability is an essential aspect of organizational viability, so it achieves the social mission in a way that is respected by those whom the organization serves and the society in which it is located. Corporate governance. Corporate organizations often use the word governance to describe both the manner in which boards of the like direct a corporation, the laws and customs applying to that direction. Corporate governance consists of the set of processes, customs, policies, laws and institutions affecting the way people direct, administer or control a corporation. Corporate governance also includes the relationships among the many players involved and the corporate goals. The principal players include the shareholders, management, and the board of directors. Other stakeholders include employees, suppliers, customers, banks and other lenders, regulators, the environment and the community at large. The first documented use of the word corporate governance is by Richard Eales to denote the structure and functioning of the corporate polity. The corporate government concept itself is older and was already used in finance textbooks at the beginning of the 20th century. Project governance. The term governance, as used in industry sector, describes the processes that need to exist for a successful project. Environmental governance, internet governance, information technology governance, IT governance primarily deals with connections between business focus and IT management. The goal of clear governance is to assure the investment in IT generate business value and mitigate the risks that are associated with IT projects. Regulatory governance. Regulatory governance reflects the emergence of decentered and mutually adaptive policy regimes which rests on regulation, rather than service provision or taxing and spending. The term captures the tendency of policy regimes to deal with complexity with delegated system of rules. It is likely to appear in arenas and nations which are more complex, more global, more contested and more liberally democratic. The term builds upon and extends the terms of the regulatory state on the one hand and governance on the other. While the term regulatory state marginalizes non-state actors in the domestic and global level, the term governance marginalizes regulation as a constitutive instrument of governance. The term regulatory governance therefore allows us to understand governance beyond the state and governance via regulation. Participatory governance. Participatory governance focuses on deepening democratic engagement through the participation of citizens in the processes of governance with the state. The idea is that citizens should play more direct roles in public decision-making or at least engage more deeply with political issues. Government officials should also be responsive to this kind of engagement. In practice, participatory governance can supplement the roles of citizens as voters or as watchdogs through more direct forms of involvement. Multi-level governance. Metagovernance. Metagovernance is widely defined as the governing of governing. It represents the established ethical principles, or norms, that shape and steer the entire governing process. It is important to note that there are no clearly defined settings within which metagoverning takes place, or particular persons who are responsible for it. While some believe metagoverning to be the role of the state which is assumed to want to steer actors in a particular direction, it can potentially be exercised by any resourceful actor who wishes to influence the governing process. Examples of this include the publishing of codes of conduct at the highest level of international government, a media focus on specific issues at the socio-cultural level. Despite the different sources both seek to establish values in such a way that they become accepted norms. The fact that norms can be established at any level and can then be used used to shape the governance process as whole. Means meta-governance is part of both the input and the output of the governing system. Collaborative governance. Governance as a normative concept. Fair governance. When discussing governance in particular organizations, the quality of governance within the organization is often compared to a standard of good governance. In the case of a business or of a non-profit organization, for example, good governance relates to consistent management, cohesive policies, guidance, processes and decision rights for a given area of responsibility, and proper oversight and accountability. Good governance implies that mechanisms function in a way that allows the executives to respect the rights and interests of the stakeholders, in a spirit of democracy. Good governance. Good governance is an indeterminate term used in international development literature to describe various normative accounts of how public institutions ought to conduct public affairs and manage public resources. These normative accounts are often justified on the grounds that they are thought to be conducive to economic ends, such as the eradication of poverty and successful economic development. Unsurprisingly, different organizations have defined governance and good governance differently to promote different normative ends. The World Bank defines governance as the manner in which power is exercised in the management of a country's economic and social resources for development. The Worldwide Governance Indicators Project of the World Bank defines governance as the traditions and institutions by which authority in a country is exercised. This considers the process by which governments are selected, monitored and replaced, the capacity of the government to effectively formulate and implement sound policies, and the respect of citizens and the state of the institutions that govern economic and social interactions among them. An alternate definition sees governance as the use of institutions, structures of authority and even collaboration to allocate resources and coordinate or control activity in society of the economy. According to the United Nations Development Programme's Regional Project on Local Governance for Latin America, governance has been defined as the rules of the political system to solve conflicts between actors and adopt decision. It has also been used to describe the proper functioning of institutions and their acceptance by the public, and it has been used to invoke the efficacy of government and the achievement of consensus by democratic means. Measuring governance. Over the last decade, several efforts have been conducted in the research and international development community in order to assess and measure the quality of governance of countries all around the world. Measuring governance is inherently a controversial and political exercise. A distinction is therefore made between external assessments, peer assessments and self-assessments. Examples of external assessments are donor assessments or comparative indices produced by international non-governmental organizations. An example of a peer assessment is the African peer review mechanism. Examples of self-assessments are country-led assessments that can be led by government, civil society, researchers and/or other stakeholders at the national level. One of these efforts to create an internationally comparable measure of governance and an example of an external assessment is the Worldwide Governance Indicators Project, developed by members of the World Bank and the World Bank Institute. The project reports aggregate and individual indicators for more than 200 countries for 6 dimensions of governance: voice and accountability, political stability and lack of violence, government effectiveness, regulatory quality, rule of law, control of corruption. To complement the macro-level cross-country worldwide governance indicators, the World Bank Institute developed the World Bank Governance Surveys, which are country-level governance assessment tools that operate at the micro-subnational level and use information gathered from a country's own citizens, business people and public sector workers to diagnose governance vulnerabilities and suggest concrete approaches for fighting corruption. A new worldwide governance index has been developed and is open for improvement through public participation. The following domains, in the form of indicators and composite indexes, were selected to achieve the development of the WGI: peace and security, rule of law, human rights and participation, sustainable development, and human development. Additionally, in 2009 the Bertelsmann Foundation published the Sustainable Governance Indicators, which systematically measure the need for reform and the capacity for reform within the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development countries. The project examines to what extent governments can identify, formulate and implement effective reforms that render a society well equipped to meet future challenges and ensure the future viability. Section 10 of the Government Performance and Results Act Modernization Act requires U.S. federal agencies to publish the strategic and performance plans and reports in machine-readable format. The International Budget Partnership launched the Open Budget Initiative in 2006 with the release of the first Open Budget Survey. The OBS is a comprehensive analysis and survey that evaluates whether central governments give the public access to budget documents and provide opportunities for public participation in the budget process. To measure the overall commitment to transparency, the IBP created Open Budget Index, which assigns a score to each country based on the results of the survey. While the OBS is released biannually, the IBP recently released a new OBS tracker, which serves as an online tool for civil society, the media, and other actors to monitor in real time whether governments are releasing 8 key budget documents. The Open Budget Index data are used by the Open Government Partnership, development aid agencies, and increasingly investors in the private sector as key indicators of governance, particularly fiscal transparency and management of public funds. Examples of country-led assessments include the Indonesian Democracy Index, monitoring of the Millennium Development Goal 9 on human rights and democratic governance in Mongolia, and the Gross National Happiness Index in Bhutan. Section 10 of the Government Performance and Results Act Modernization Act requires U.S. federal agencies to publish the performance plans and reports in machine-readable format, thereby providing the basis for evaluating the quality of the performance of the governance functions entrusted to them, as specified in the strategic objectives and performance indicators. Publishing performance reports openly on the web in a standard, machine-readable format is good practice for all organizations whose plans and reports should be matters of public record.